So thank you everybody for coming to watch our webinar about calculus. My name is Marissa. I'm the marketing coordinator for our group of Mathnasiums. I'll be handling the Q&A during this, so if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A at any point, and we'll either get them answered right away or I'll flag them for Benda to answer at the end. It's like the last 15 minutes. But I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Benda. So he is going to give you a lovely presentation about calculus.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you. And thank you so much for, being the woman behind the curtain with all of this, because Zoom is definitely a lot to handle, especially when you have so many participants on. But hello, good afternoon, maybe good morning for some of you people out there. My name is Benda Ngandu. I am a Center Director at Mathnasium and Midlothian. Midlothian is an area about 30 to 40 minutes outside of Richmond, Virginia. And let me go into a little bit about what Mathnasium is real quickly. So Mathnasium, we are a math-only learning center. And what we focus on with students is filling in gaps of our students. And we typically service students in our regular program from 1st to 12th grade. So mind you, I'm sure some first graders aren't worried about calculus. So that kind of leads me into our first poll. Oops. Sorry, here's my presentation. What is calculus? But now we're actually going to go into poll one. So Miss Marissa, if you could pull up that poll, I just want to see who am I talking to? So basically what the poll is that should now be up is we just want to see which best describes you. There's definitely a wide variety of areas I'm sure some people are that fall into, but I just want to see how to gear my presentation to. So let's give that a second. But again, my name is Benda. I'm with, I think someone else just joined. I'm with Mathnasium and Midlothian, where we focus on making math fun for our students in our regular program services, everyone from 1st to 12th grade. And what we really like to do is have fun with math. That's our motto. We make math fun and we make math make sense. So now, moving forward, thank you for everyone that contributed to the poll. Let's see, looks like we have some high schoolers in here, which is awesome. So now, what we're going to be talking about is just a few areas of calculus. This is part one of the series, and I will talk a little bit more about what part two will be. But just for part one, we're going to be talking about the definition of calculus, a little bit of history, why you take calculus, some topics in calculus, and the different varieties there are into calculus. So first, let's talk about the definition of calculus. So what I always found really cool is that before calculus, math was pretty static. And what static means is that math was pretty constant and it stood still. So what we didn't really calculate was rate of change. Or I should say we didn't have a great way to talk about the rate of change. That's what calculus is. It's a branch of math that involves the study of rates of change in objects and in real life. So now let's talk about who came up with that. So calculus. So calculus came up and was developed by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Leibniz. For Godfrey, we're just gonna refer to him as GL. Bear with me. I don't want to mess it up every time I say it. So basically our main man, Newton, and our other main man, GL, his right hand, were two of the biggest contributors to calculus. So Isaac Newton, if you don't know who Isaac Newton is, you've probably been living under a rock for the past 150 years, but one of the greatest minds in the world's history, but he's contributed to a lot of things, but one of his biggest contributions to the human world is calculus. So what he started with is finding out applications and physical systems that can represent calculus concepts that we now use. And he discovered this during a very interesting time in the world. And what he did with that is actually apply that to real world applications so that it wasn't just theory. He actually was able to apply this to, what's true. So that's the biggest thing about science and math, is that we have to prove something is always consistent to make it an actual rule of law. So that's what's really great about calculus, is that he's tested all these theories and they have been tested since. So moving forward, our main man GL, he was the one contributing to the notations of calculus. So when I mean notations, I just mean, what do we call this? What do we call that? How do we represent this? And we can kind of go into that maybe when we touch on the topics of calculus, but he was the one that was able to actually formalize it, so it would be easier to, distribute to the world. Because I'm sure, as a lot of you geniuses know, typically the smarter you are, the less organized and the less effective you are at at displaying information to others. So good thing Newton had our best friend GL with him. But going back to what I was talking about, when Newton actually started developing calculus during the bubonic plague, which, if you don't know, the bubonic plague, also known as Black Death, it was a very huge plague that touched a lot of countries in Europe and spread even past Europe. But what's really cool is that during that time when Isaac Newton was on, wow, quarantine. There we go. That's the word. Like what we're kind of on now. When Isaac Newton was on quarantine, he started developing calculus, and this was in 1665. And even though he was, our quarantine was kind of iffy, you could still leave the house if you wanted to. No, they did not leave the house, especially because one of the biggest outbursts of bubonic plague was actually in a town less than 20 miles away from Isaac Newton. So it was said that he stayed in his cabin, I think they said, for almost 13 years, where he was able to compile, document, and start the development of calculus. So that's the history of calculus. Now we're going to be talking about, why do we take calculus? So we're taking calculus for a variety of reasons. So I can tell you why I took it, but for those high school students that answered the poll, which you're probably looking for with taking with calculus, it's probably for college credit. So we're going to the different types of calculus classes in a little bit, but 9 times out of 10, we're taking it either to prepare ourselves for the college level calculus, or because we're taking a class that would give us some college credit. And might I tell you, high school is definitely the best time to gain college credit, because one, you're not being distracted by the other things that happen when you're in college. And trust me, you will have lots of distractions. That's a part of growing up. But definitely also because usually when you get your college credit in high school, it is significantly cheaper than what you would pay in tuition at college. So definitely hats off to you high schoolers who are already tapping into calculus, whichever class that might be, so you can get ahead in math. That's awesome. So now some other reasons you might be taking calculus is because of a major requirement. So basically everyone in STEM, I can guarantee you, has to take at least up into calculus 1, STEM being, having a science, technology, engineering, or math major as a undergrad student. That definitely will help with taking calculus, but there are even some majors that you'd be surprised to know that they want you to take up to such a high level math. My favorite example to use is one of our instructors here at my center. She's actually a full-time English teacher now, but she was working for us while she was an undergrad student at a local college called Virginia Commonwealth University, where she told me as an English major, she was also required to take up to Calculus 1. And she told me all of the English majors hated it. Luckily, she's one of those people that have, kind of two brains, or that has access, I should say, to both sides of her brain. So English and math come easy to her. But a lot of people were thinking, oh, I took English, or I took up the English major because I never wanted to see math again. Now I'm expected to take everything up to Calculus 1. That may seem ridiculous, but the reason that a lot of colleges require you to take up to calculus is because of the next reason here, is that no matter what level of calculus you're taking, is that it definitely helps you with your problem solving skills. So calculus is actually one of my favorite maths because of how it makes you think and how you have to manipulate questions to answer it. So what's really cool is that a lot of times people think that math does not affect them in the real world. But even if you never have to use, not that this is calculus, but even if you never have to use the Pythagorean theorem with whatever background you're in. You definitely have to develop the number sense and the problem solving skills that are associated with learning these techniques to make sure that you're successful in the workplace and successful in real life things. But like I was saying, real world, next thing is real world applications. There are several topics that when we get to the topics that are typically outlined in calculus, I will highlight, but there are a lot of real world applications to calculus, well, really everything. But there are things like related rates and optimization that companies nowadays use, especially if you're on that engineering track, that companies use to, do when they do, forgot the phrase I wanted to use. Um, Moving on. This is just definitely, there's a lot of aspects that you can use in calculus that can apply to real world applications, which is really cool. I love optimization, which we'll touch on a little bit later. So here are just some of the areas that they go over in calculus. So we're talking about limits, derivatives, applications of derivatives, integrals, and applications of integrals. These are not limited to what you would be going over in calculus. In fact, these are actually very, very broad calculus terms. But what's really awesome is that a lot of them have very, it may seem kind of simple, but they have a lot of underlying topics, kind of like the things I was just talking about. So limits, put a little star next to that one. Like I said, this is a part 1 of the series. Part 2 will actually be titled "The Limit Does Not Exist." I should say in quotes, but we're going to be kind of just jumping into limits and just touching on what limits are, learning how to do limits, and just really getting a intro into limits so we can talk about what the basis of calculus is. But definitely tune into that next week. You'll be sent information on that. The next topic is derivatives. We talked about rates of change. I'm not going to go into too much of derivatives because today's session is not for teaching topics. I just want to give you an overview about what calculus is. But derivatives goes into rates of change. But then when we started talking about applications of derivatives, that's where things come into play, like the topics I mentioned earlier with related rates and optimization. Those are two of my favorite applications of derivatives because you can directly apply that to real life circumstances. And there isn't really there really isn't a limit to what you can apply it to. Calculus is for everything that you want to use in the real world. And then the next thing is integrals, also known as antiderivatives, and then applications of integrals. And we definitely will not be digging into that today, but that might be one of our parts on the series. Next is what are the different varieties that we actually have as far as calculus classes. So the first thing is high school calculus. So with high school calculus, this is the basic, you can say, kind of level of calculus that students typically take in high school. And usually students will take this either their junior or their senior year of high school. This is not for college credit, but this is definitely a good class you want to take to, kind of diversify yourself maybe to other colleges. To colleges as you high schoolers are applying to colleges. And it's really cool because you don't have the rigor of a college class, but you do get the curriculum of it. But as far as college classes in high school, the first class I want to talk about is AP Calculus AB. So this is an advanced placement class. This just AP means that it is certified through College Board to be kind of a college rigor class through high school. And then at the end of the year, you will be taking an AP exam that is scored on a scale from 1 to 5. And depending on what you score, depending upon what you score and what the college accepts, will grant you credit into colleges for calculus, of course. So let's say we have Susie here who goes to Midlothian High School, and she's going to be a chemistry major at the University of Virginia. Susie took AP Calculus AB as a senior in high school, and then she was able to score a 5, which is the highest score you can get on the AP exam. The University of Virginia will grant her the 3 or 4 credits that calculus class that she's required to take as a core class before she gets into her actual major classes. That way she can knock out 3 or 4 credits. And if any of you are familiar with University of Virginia, that is a lot of money per credit. So her knocking 3 or 4 of them out is definitely awesome. And that's before she even starts college, which is even better. So next class is another AP class, but this is, instead of AB, this is BC. So the cool thing about the two differences between AB and BC is that AB is kind of a slower course. We talked about the different topics, and I should have mentioned that that is typically the progression of the classes that I listed it in. We talked about limits first, then derivatives and applications of derivatives, and then integrals. AB will kind of stop at integrals, and it will really only touch on it, while BC will still do all of those things and jump into applications of integrals. Applications of integrals is actually very, very, very intensive. That wouldn't say it's any more subtopics, I should say, than any other area of calculus, but it's definitely what students typically struggle with the most. But it's my favorite part too, so I think you will enjoy it. But the best thing about BC is that typically you will get, as an AP class, AP exam score, the higher you get, typically you might get more credit. So that same Susie that goes to Midlothian High School, this is just the University of Virginia. I know this for a fact because I've had this with one of our students. But for a BC class, if she would have got a 5 on her BC AP exam, then that will actually get her 4 to 5 credits. So just 1 more credit than what they would offer her for an AB class, just because it's more immersive and they have to kind of, teach themselves, I should say, because it's definitely a fast-paced class to fit into a 36-week academic year. But that's the point of AP classes, to, push your students. But now, let's say we're out of high school and we're in college, and we didn't do anything in high school to start our college credits. So the first 2 classes you would typically take of calculus is College Calculus 1 or College Calculus 2. Typically, College Calculus 1 is just up into applications of derivatives. So we got limits, derivatives, and applications of derivatives. And then College Calculus 2 actually start with a little bit of review, of course, with College Calculus 1, but then they typically jump straight into integrals and then applications of integrals as well. And then you have, if you're extra, then you have college multivariable and vector calculus, that most people also call Calculus 3. Very less common class that students typically take unless you are directed towards math or a specialized engineering field. But then the last class, the last thing I want to talk about, some other classes. These are just the typical classes, especially colleges. They make their own curriculum. There can be a bunch of classes dedicated to one thing. I've had a Arkansas, where a student who lives in our area, which is in Virginia, but she's a student at, can't remember the name of it, but a school in Arkansas, and it's a specialized school for STEM. They have specialized classes even after Calc 3 to kind of just pick certain areas to focus on that's going to help them for their career. And what I really like about that is they, learn things that they're definitely going to use, versus what I mentioned earlier with that English teacher taking Calculus 1. She's not really going to use calculus to teach her high school English class now, is she? But those other classes that students can possibly take is awesome. So now we're actually going to go ahead and do a second poll. And this is just to see, again, talking to our people to see, what are you taking? I just want to talk about some resources you guys could use. So please go ahead and knock that poll out as soon as you can, so I can talk about some of those resources. But I see a lot of people are taking AP Calculus AB, so I will jump into that. This next slide here is actually AP books. So like I said, with advanced placement, students are expected to take a AP exam at the end of the year. Things have been a little bit different, especially this past year due to everything going on with the virus. But I anticipate things to kind of get back to normal for the AP exams next year. But typically it is a 2 to 3 hour test for either AP, AB, or BC. And there's a calculator, non-calculator part. And I want to be sure that students understand when they take AP classes, that it's not something that you just want to that you just want to treat like any other class, this will definitely give you a hint into what college is. So definitely dive into it head first and be proactive. That's the biggest thing about anything, is that acting before there isn't problems. So let's make sure that whatever class you're taking, looks like a lot of us are taking AP Calculus AB, whatever class you're taking, that we are preparing for it even now. I know class doesn't, or school doesn't start until September. But I mean, hey, with you guys just had, you high schoolers just had 2-3 months off school. So let's just, hammer on some things in the summer just to make sure that we have a solid start into the school year. So the first book I want to talk about is actually my favorite. So it's called 5 Steps to a 5. I have the 2020 version picture of BC, but it's also a 2020 version of AD, and it's also versions that usually come out every year. Like I said, I think the virus might change some things, but usually the new 5 Steps to a 5 books come out in the summer. Like it should be out now for 2021. I'm not sure if it is. But no matter what year, the test typically does not change that much. So definitely all the content is great, but I will say it gets better after each year. So notice it says 5 steps to a 5. The last 5 that they're talking about is the AP exam score, which as I said earlier, is the highest AP score you can get on your AP test. So what I love about this book is that they have certain steps, and they also have a timeline that you should take. Most AP exams are in May, so there's actually a plan starting in August about how you can work to get to your AP, a 5 on your AP exam. So I wouldn't even suggest waiting till August. If you can, just definitely get some type of resource and starting ASAP. But definitely with this book, we can make sure that you are not only ahead of your class, but you're also on track, because sometimes what happens with schools is, not timing isn't always perfect. We may get a snow day here. Hey, look, quarantine just knocked out the last 3 months of school in this past school year. So we definitely want to make sure that you're ahead of the curve, because your teacher might not even get the chance to teach you everything before the AP exam. Not that it's their fault. That's just the way it is of the world. So we want to make sure that you have as many resources as you can. And then the next book I want to talk about, which is also a great book, which is why I put it on here, is the Barron's AP Calculus book. The biggest difference between the 5 Steps to a 5 book and the Barron book is that the Barron comes with more practice, so it actually has more practice tests. And it also has more online resources you can use for practice as well. But the Barron has less of a preparatory structure to it. So what I liked about 5 Steps to a 5 when I was a high schooler is that I was a high school boy. I was not organized, and I did not have a plan for things. I just did things. In order for you to do well in AP, you definitely want to have a plan and be consistent with that plan. The Barron does not have anything set up for that. Not that there's anything wrong, but there's definitely a lot more practice resources in that. And that's just 2 books. These are 2 of my personal favorite books. If you go into Barnes and Nobles, or if you go on their website or go on Amazon, there is a whole string of publishers and a whole lot of areas that you can find in their college, AP/college/SAT prep section. There's a whole wall. I know at my Barnes and Nobles, there's a huge wall of AP books, and there's 5 Steps to a 5, Barron's. I can't even think of the other names right now. But there's a lot of resources out there. So if you don't pick these 2, that's fine. Just pick something that works for you. And like I said, I suggest getting started ASAP for those AP Calculus high school students. But what I also want to talk about before we go into what our next session is that for you college students and above, there's definitely textbooks you can use. So if you are a college student, you can always find probably an old syllabus of whatever class and class number from your college website. If it's not available to you right now, and on that syllabus would be some type of textbook. I would definitely suggest diving into that textbook, just like the high schoolers, diving into that textbook before you actually start that class, because that'll give you a good preview into what calculus is, so you can kind of walk into it without being like, oh no, this is terrible. So calculus is challenging, but that does not mean it is not that it is impossible. Sorry. So I definitely want to make sure that everyone is successful in calculus and spread the love, since I love calculus so much. Another resource you could use is me. So our next session is Calculus Part 2, which is called The Limits Does Not Exist. Sorry, The Limit Does Not Exist, which is one of my favorite quotes from a very old movie. I don't think it's old, but I was talking to one of my students about it yesterday, and she said it was old. She's a third grader. What does she know? But it was definitely an awesome knock at math and a pop culture reference. So I may we won't talk about that movie today, but I'll definitely go into limits, what limits are, even maybe how to evaluate limits, but it'll just be a short class, and then I'll even give you some references on what you can do to actually practice limits if you have not gotten one of the resources books. But this is just part 2 of our series. We'll talk about part 3 after part 2. So there's definitely more topics we'll be able to talk about. But also what's cool is that our woman behind the curtain, Marissa, will be able to send you the link to that webinar since you registered for this one. And just like this one, there is no cost. So, just come and learn with Benda. And that concludes my presentation. So I'm going to welcome Marissa back up here, and we're going to see if there's any questions for us.
Okie dokie. If somebody has any questions either about anything that Benda's talked about or anything about calculus in general, please just pop that into the Q&A and we'll get those answered for you. I'll give people a minute to type. I know it takes a second.
No problem. This will give me time to talk about Mean Girls. So that quote I was talking about is Mean Girls, which, give me a second, I don't remember now.
What don't you remember? Because I probably do.
What year it came out?
Oh, no, I have no idea. I'm in hard denial about the fact that that's an old movie.
I was going to say, but it came out 2004.
That's
so
not too old.
It's not at all. That's what I said. So our third grade student who's like, I don't know, how old are you when you're in third grade? Like 9, 8? She was like, I wasn't even born yet. And I was like, oh my gosh. Wow.
Okay, so I've got a question. So which college calculus class do high school students typically go into if they take AP Calculus AB?
So typically when they take AP Calculus AB and they do get a score that the college will take as credit, it would usually take their Calc 1. It usually take place of their Calc 1 class, their college Calc 1 class that depending upon what major they are, usually they probably take that in their freshman or sophomore year. But what's good about that is typically college Calc 1 is paired with college Calc 2. So you'll go ahead and jump into college calculus part 2, and then you'll be able to be ahead of the curve, because sometimes with those college Calc 2 people is that they did not take college Calc 1 for some reason, so they definitely have to learn a lot more than you do.
And I will emphasize it really depends on your school, because different schools take different things or they count as different credits. Even if you don't get that counted as Calc 1, it's possible it would count as a math elective credit, depending on what school you go to. Because I had a few that were just electives, but they counted towards graduating.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely say for Virginia public schools, Virginia private schools, it will count as a math elective, like Marissa said. Public schools, though, in Virginia, will typically
I mean, it counted as an elective at the college level, because I took a lot of weird dual enrollment classes when I was in school. So it counted as a college elective for math.
Oh, you reminded me. I didn't write that down. That's another option you could take. Is dual enrollment. Thank you, Marissa. So before somebody asks the next question, is that typically I know in our area in Midlothian, we partner with a really good community college. And not we, but the Chesterfield, our county partners with a really good community college, and they're able to give what Marissa was just talking about, that dual enrollment class. And what dual enrollment is high schools actually have the chance to be taught by a college professor and also be be given college credit through that community college. And because it's done through that community college, typically this could change state by state, but I can say for Virginia, because it is Virginia Community College, it will definitely, without a doubt, give you credit towards your Virginia public school education if that class is something that you need for your major, whether that's college Calc 1 or a math elective.
Okay, so if you have any other questions, please go ahead and throw those in the chat. And y'all are also welcome to hang out and listen to other people's questions. But since we're kind of moving a little bit slow, thank you everybody for coming. I hope that you, I guess, learned a little bit more about calculus and what it is. I really hope you tune in next week to learn about limits. And that way you'll actually understand that Mean Girls quote. So then you can, like, as homework, go watch the movie if you haven't already.
If I'm legally allowed to, we will show it as part of our presentation. I don't think I am though.
I don't think we have time for that in all of this.
I will show you a
Okay.
picture of the question and we will solve it together. How about that?
Okay. I do have a couple more questions about Mathnasium specifically. So I have a question. What is the highest level of math you offer at Mathnasium?
So as far as our own curriculum, we typically go up to SAT prep and pre-calculus. We do help with calculus. Most of our instructors, I know I can speak for the centers in our franchise. Most of our instructors are well versed up to calculus. But a lot of times people's problem with calculus is not calculus, it's pre-calculus or it's algebra. So we're definitely able to fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps that they might have so they can have a strong foundation and go strong into their calculus class. And then we also help with their homework. So it's not like they're not doing any calculus. We can help them with their homework, teach them something if they don't know it. But yeah.
Okay, and then I have another question. How would Mathnasium help prepare you for calculus? I think you just talked about that actually, so let's skip. How are pre-calculus and calculus AB related? So I guess, yeah, you didn't talk much about pre-calculus.
That's a good well, pre-calculus is his own thing. So pre-calculus, at least in Virginia, the standards for us is typically pre-calculus and trigonometry go hand in hand. What's really cool about pre-calculus and AB Calc AB is that pre-calculus actually goes into what our next part will be. They talk briefly about limits, and they also talk about what's called the definition of a derivative. So in pre-calculus, you want to make sure that is strong because a lot of things that I know when I took pre-calculus in high school and we learned about it, it's called difference quotient as well as limits. I was like, what is this? This is kind of weird. I've never seen anything like this. And luckily that was towards the end of the year, but if it was beginning of the year, I would have completely lost it because I would have seen it again when I took AP calculus that next year. So basically pre-calculus, you definitely want to make sure you're strong in that. If you did not have a good year with pre-calculus, maybe this summer starting calculus isn't the best idea. Definitely going back and filling in those gaps will help. Because just like anything else in math, it builds upon each other. And I mean, it's in the name, pre-calculus, you need to be good at if you want to be successful in calculus.
Sorry, I'm trying to type and read at the same time.
Right.
And then I also have, what majors do you know require calculus as a prerequisite?
Uh,
Any STEM class, all engineering.
all STEM, all engineering. I can say definitely all of the TEM science. I do know at VCU, I don't know if marine biology falls into that, but I had a marine biology student who needed a math elective, but it didn't have to be calculus. So maybe not all science, but I can tell you all engineering, mechanical, electrical. I'm not even gonna name all the engineering because there's so many. And then definitely if you're a math major, you take all math. And then technology majors as well, whether that be computer science. It's not really about knowing the calculus. Again, it's going back to having that problem solving because definitely if you're a programmer, you need to figure out complex situations and how to code around that. So I say that from experience because I used to be a computer science major before I switched my major probably for like the fifth time back when I was in college. So definitely making sure pre-calculus is good so you can be strong in calculus. It's going to expand into whatever major you're in if you're in the STEM field.
Okay, well, thank you all for your questions. If anyone has any questions, we'll hang out for a moment just in case. But thank you all for coming. I hope you learned a lot, like I said. Thank you, Benda, for setting this up for us and teaching us all about calculus.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you everyone for coming. Can't wait to see you guys again next week.